Good evening, everybody. It's 7 o'clock. That's why I brought the gavel down. Just to explain, we haven't got our normal chat working, the YouTube connection or our live broadcasting connection. So the multi-talented Peter Mannings this evening is going to multitask, and he's going to connect us to the world at large. So there might be a little bit of moving around. And if in the middle of it all we get the news, well, you know, who's to say? Okay. Anyway, that was just by way of explanation. So it might just be a little bit more chaotic at the top table than it normally is at the best of times. All right, fine. So are we now connected to the rest of the world? Good. All right, fine. So good evening, everybody. This is a meeting of the Development Managed Committee of East Herts District Council. It's taking place on Wednesday, the 13th of July. And if you are watching us out there, we're very pleased to have you with us. We always appreciate the fact that members of the public do take an interest and participate in this piece of the democratic function of East Herts District Council. So thank you very much indeed for that. Going to go to the agenda. Item 1 is apologies. We do have a couple of apologies. Councillor Crystal can't be with us. And it's worth mentioning that nor can Councillor Crystal's substitute. And also Councillor Ruth Buckmaster is unwell and therefore can't be with us. I'm very pleased to say that Councillor Stan Bull is substituting for her tonight. Thank you very much, Stan, for coming along. Appreciate it a lot. Thank you very much indeed. Item 3, declarations of interest. No. There's the odd shake of a head. There's nothing happening out there as normal, of course. So there are no declarations of interest. Thank you very much. Minutes. Now, on my agenda paper, it says the minutes are to follow. Is that still the case, Peter? I beg your pardon. Let me just find. Where are we? I'm just struggling to put my finger on. Perhaps I could just ask, does anybody have any comments on the minutes? No, in that case, I think I need a proposer and a seconder. So proposer Terence, seconder Karen and Redfern got there first. All those in favour? It's okay, Stan, we know you weren't there. It's all right, thank you. Yeah, great, well done. Thank you, everybody.
I'm also abstaining because I was absent for that
meeting. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, understood. All right, so that brings us on to item 5 of the agenda. For the benefit of the viewing public, item 5 on the agenda has 2 parts to it, as an item A and an item B. But item A has been withdrawn. The applicant has withdrawn that item from this evening's business. So that therefore brings us straight into item 5B. Item 5B is application 321 1248 FUL. And it's in respect of the proposed erection of a 3-bedroom dwelling to include 2 additional parking spaces and a refuse store. This is a partly retrospective application, and the location is 19A Marlborough Close, Bishop Stortford, Hertfordshire. And I'm going to ask the officer, who's just given me a big smile at the end of the table there, to come in and present this to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members of the committee. I'm Richard Freeman. I'm one of the team leaders in the development management team. As the Chair has just said, the application before you is for the erection of a 3-bed dwelling with 2 additional parking spaces and a refuse store. It is part retrospective. As you'll see from the planning history, a planning permission was previously granted, which the applicant was in the process of implementing. It was drawn to our attention that there were some errors in the submitted information, and so our enforcement team investigated the matter, and we now have this application in front of us effectively because the drawing submitted with the previous scheme, it had the incorrect site boundary in it. So I've got some drawings later which will show you a comparison of the correct and the incorrect site boundary, but the planning permission has previously been granted for a very similar development. This is a plan showing the site. The application site, the proposed house, is outlined in red. 19A, which is the host property or donor property, as it were, is outlined in blue, and Marlborough Close you can see to the north. To orientate members, Thorley Hill is to the left-hand side, and it is Nelson Road, which is at the bottom end of the screen, and those are the rear gardens of those properties. I'm sorry, I just realized the orientation of this is wrong slightly. North is actually to the right as opposed to up, I beg your pardon. The land levels fall from the west to the east, and so 19A is set at a higher level than the application site, which is at a higher level than the Nelson Road properties. Thank you. This is the site plan and location plan submitted with this application. I only very briefly want to touch on this. If you look at the left-hand drawing, you can see in red the 2 parking spaces to the front of the site. You then have off to the side, adjacent to an area, a communal area for turning. You then have the building, which is proposed, and then a rear garden to the south of it, as you can see at the back of the site. Next slide, please. This is a slide taken from the previous permission, which is the 2019 application set out in your report. Effectively, the purpose of showing you this is to compare and contrast this with the submitted drawings which you have for determination this evening. The bottom right image is the front elevation of the proposal, and the top left image is the elevation which should be on the right hand side of that front elevation, the west elevation, the side elevation. It is a house which is of a modern design and appearance. It's set in an area which has a relatively mixed character. It's in a relatively unobtrusive site location, and officers consider that it is appropriate for there to be a modern design in this area. It respects various characteristics of the area, which I can go into in more detail if members would like. And as you'll know, it's not for the planning system to impose one particular architectural style on an area. Thank you. And this is the, that for clarity, that image was from the previous permitted scheme, and these are the images from the scheme currently under consideration. So if I could draw members' attention to the north elevation, which is in the middle on the left-hand side. That is the front elevation, thank you. That is the front elevation of the proposal. It is effectively exactly the same as what has previously been consented in terms of the style and the appearance and the materiality which is being proposed, which is bricks and then a metal zinc roof and detailing. You've got the side elevations located. So the west elevation you can see is almost exactly the same, and then the south and the east elevation as well. Moving very briefly to the floor plans, if you look at the ground floor outlined in red, again, very, very similar footprint. The site area is different, and so this is closer to the boundary, which is at the bottom of the screen. There we go, thank you. And a small area of patio space in front of the kitchen has also been omitted from the previously approved scheme because it was outside of the owner's control, just there, thank you. And finally, on the first floor plan, the house is laid out as you'd expect, effectively, with bedrooms around a staircase. And if I can just draw your attention to bedroom 2, which is the rear facing bedroom with a large window which would look to the south. Thank you. This drawing is for information effectively, and you have the red line outlining the current application site, and then the green line is the application site as previously submitted and was the one in error. And so as you can see, it is effectively that boundary on the eastern side at the bottom of the scheme, which was found to be inaccurate. And so this is just highlighting that for you. You can also hopefully see the green outline superimposed on the footprint of the building currently under consideration, hopefully. And that is the footprint of what was previously approved. So effectively, the building's in exactly the same location, but the site boundary is smaller. Now there are some impacts of that which I'll go into in a moment, but these are effectively summarised in 1.3 of the report. It means that that side elevation is closer to the site boundary, and also there is a retaining structure which has been built in the rear garden adjacent to the western boundary, which is where I was just indicating, and which I've got a photograph of in a moment. So as we said, part retrospective, the building has been taken quite some way through construction. The photograph on the left-hand side is the application site in scaffolding, and 19A, the host property, in the foreground. And then, so that's effectively the front and side elevation. And then the photograph on the right-hand side is the rear elevation. The retaining structure, which I was just talking about, you can see on the left-hand side. And so because of the land levels changes across the site, the building is set into the ground and so needs that retaining structure, whereas previously that was just shown as being a slope which is being retained. You can hopefully see on the right-hand side the site boundary. There's a hedge there which used to run all the way down the boundary. Part of that has been taken out, and the building, the side elevation of the building, is now very close to that boundary. I believe members have all seen a copy, or have been sent at any rate a copy of some representations which were received late. They've been summarised in the additional representations reports, which should be available to you. Maybe at this point I can just talk about a couple of the issues raised, if I may. So it is a material consideration that a previous permission has been granted for a very similar scheme, but you do need to take into account the fact that this proposal is different by virtue of having the accurate site boundaries. Now, on the side which the error was, is the rear gardens of the properties on Nelson Road. They're set at a lower level. The proposal would be visible from them. And in fact, if I could have the next slide, please, we do have, these are photographs taken from the rear of properties on Nelson Road. So on the left-hand side, you can see between the vegetation, the building there, and you can also make it out towards the right. There we go as well. So it's visible at the end of the garden. It is at a higher level. Officers feel that because of the retention of some of that screening and because of the depths of the gardens, it would be visible, but it wouldn't have a detrimental impact, or so significant a detrimental impact as to warrant refusal. We are conditioning that the first floor windows in the side elevation there are obscure glazed to make sure that there's no overlooking from an elevated position on that side because of the proximity to the rear gardens. If I could ask you to go back. Oh yeah, that's fine as well. So the left-hand slide shows you from the application site looking back towards where we've seen, and so you can see the separation distance there is considerable. And the right-hand image is looking from the rear elevation of the constructed building to the rear to Thorley Hill. As you can see, the properties on Thorley Hill follow the ground level change as well and slope down. They're at a similar level and are slightly elevated. There have been concerns raised in that late representation about the intervisibility between the two sites. The distances set out in the report as being quite considerable, greater than 30 metres. We're therefore satisfied that the window-to-window separation distance is appropriate and there wouldn't be undue overlooking. In a suburban area, there is generally some overlooking, and that is to be anticipated and is generally mutual. And so we don't feel that a loss of privacy is so significant as to warrant refusal of the scheme. It wouldn't have a significant impact in terms of loss and light and outlook. There are concerns raised in some of the representation about, because Thorley Hill properties are at a higher level, their view would be different. There would be more of the application site to look at. A view is not protected in planning terms. It is the outlook, it is the light, it is the overbearing impact or not of the proposal. And because of those separation distances, we're satisfied with it. Finally, if I can just draw members' attention to conditions 3 and 4. These conditions are seeking replacements, soft landscaping for the hedge which is being removed. It effectively is too close to the side elevation to be replaced with a hedge. So we would condition details of a close bordered fence, a fence or boundary wall in that location, and other landscaping within the site to offset that loss so that we don't end up with a loss of biodiversity. Thank you, Chair. The recommendation is for approval.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. Appreciate it. And well done to the operator of the slides. Very, very good. Now we have some speakers in relation to this item. We have one speaker against and one speaker in favour. So the first speaker that we'll take is the speaker against. I'm afraid I probably will mispronounce your name. I apologise, but it's Gosia Bacanovic. Not bad. Yeah. Okay. If you'd like to just come up and take this seat here, and then don't do anything at all until you've sat down and I speak to you again. Okay, so the rules of engagement are, as you may know, you get 3 minutes, and that starts when you press the button and the red light comes on. If you are still speaking at 3 minutes, we will cut you off. So it's 3 minutes. Okay, thank you very much.
First of all, the images I've just seen up on the screen are totally misleading. There's just one point. So I'm here representing 16 residents, and in my professional capacity as a commercial building surveyor, I'd like to raise 2 points: the south-facing fully glazed window and also the siting of the building on the plot. So first of all, the south-facing first floor window, we would like this window to be permanently obscured up to 1.1 metre from the floor. This is because we have discussed this with the case officer, and it appears that only the uphill overlooking of the new development to Thorley Hill properties has been taken into consideration, whereas the downhill overlooking from Thorley Hill into the new building has not. On the topic of a surveying error, which has resulted in the eastern elevation wall being built almost 1 metre closer to the eastern boundary, I can tell you for sure there is no surveyor, architect or decent builder that would make such an error. This supposed error now results in a much bigger, larger structure than Mr. Baker got originally his planning permission for. And speaking in my professional capacity, also a very poorly constructed building, which in years to come will suffer from damp and mold given the proximity of it to an 80-year-old hedge and a goat willow tree. Not to mention the likely possibility of heave and subsidence given the soil type. We would like this easterly wall to be moved back to the original position, i.e. 1.4 metres from the boundary hedge. In conclusion, I do not believe in the slightest that Mr. Baker's builder committed a surveying error. I believe it was a deliberate deception to get a much bigger building than the plot size comfortably allows for, similar to the other deceptions to the planners in submitting false information to what land he actually owns in his first application. And actually a total disregard shown for all the original planning conditions. Ladies and gentlemen, why should Mr. Baker be allowed to deceive the planners and his neighbours and be allowed to have the building he decides he should have, showing a total disregard for planning policies and conditions? And what example does that give to the rest of us who hold these policies and rules in high regard? Thank you.
I'd just like you to press the red button. If you could just press the button again. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we now have a speaker for the application. This is Hazel Izard. Of course, the rules of engagement are exactly the same for you. So from the minute you press the second you press the button, we'll be counting. You get 3 minutes and then we'll cut you off. Thank you.
Thank you. As we know, there is no objection to the principle of a new dwelling in this location. The site also benefits from an earlier consent that remains extant until 22nd January 2023 and is a material consideration of significant weight. The main issue is the difference between the schemes. First, there's some background. Mr. and Mrs. Baker are not developers. They currently reside at 19A and wish to downsize, freeing up a large family home. Their process began with pre-application requests in 2018 and 2019 before planning permission was granted in January 2020. The applicants discharged their pre-commencement conditions and commenced construction. Unfortunately, enforcement were contacted due to the proximity of the building to the eastern boundary, and a revised application was requested. It became apparent that the boundaries on the previous consent had been drawn incorrectly. The siting and footprint of the dwelling has not actually changed in relation to existing buildings. It is still located exactly the same distance from 19A and at the same distance from buildings on Nelson Road. Members are invited to view the comparison drawing that shows the two schemes. The key difference is that the eastern boundary is now approximately 700 millimetres closer than originally planned. The gap is now 620 millimetres at its narrowest and just over a metre at its widest. The new architect has double-checked this boundary, which according to the Land Registry does splay out slightly. This reduced gap is not out of keeping with the pattern of development in the surrounding area, which comprises a mix of dwellings, many with limited spacing in between. Although the dwelling sits on higher land than Nelson Road, a distance of at least 28 metres remains between buildings. The reduced gap to the boundary therefore has no material effect on amenity, particularly given that the majority of these neighbours have outbuildings at the end of their gardens. The hedge, located along this eastern boundary, has not been removed but cut back on the applicant's side and has already produced new growth. This hedge continues to provide some screening, but a standard 1.8 metre high fence is also proposed. The building itself remains similar to the approved scheme. There is no change to its height, scale or contemporary flat roof design. A previously approved patio in the northeast corner has been removed, but a larger rear patio has been added along with a 1.5 metre high retaining wall adjacent to 19A to provide level access to the rear garden. There is also no change to the approved fenestration. There has been some confusion due to a labelling error on the previously approved plans, but in fact no changes are proposed. First floor windows on the east elevation are already obscure glazed and non-opening up to 1.7 metres. In conclusion, the reduced gap to the eastern boundary is not significant, has no material effect on the amenity of neighbours. Appropriate boundary screening can still be achieved. As advised by your officers, the difference is marginal and significant weight should be afforded to the extant permission. Members are therefore respectfully requested to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very well timed. Thank you. Okay, so we've heard from our speaker against and the speaker in favour. I'm going to throw it open to the floor now for questions. I've got one or two myself, but we'll take the floor first. Terence and Tim, in that order, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for the officer and a couple of statements on a technical level. Given that it is claimed that it's an error around the boundary drawing, have we seen any evidence of dated emails that put it in the correct timeline to show that it was in fact an error and not a fortuitous oversight? Which is something I would want to be seeing on that basis if I was in your shoes. Not to tell you how to do your job, obviously, but from a certification point of view. And then the other thing as well is, I know that you're waiting for details of hard landscaping for parking. I would ask whether we might be able to condition that to be permeable paving or permeable surface. And then the final one is on noise impact assessment of the air source heat pump. And I note that the requirement is that the measurement should be from a metre from the nearest property, not having any increased noise. That, of course, doesn't affect or account for the effect of any background noise for people who are sleeping in the property itself. So anybody lying in bed in the new property could possibly hear the hum of an air source heat pump affecting their sleep. So I think that should be revised, that it should be measured from within inside the dwelling at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you, Terence. Tim.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got an observation and a couple of questions. I think that the pictures shown to us tonight have been carefully edited, and the view from Nelson Road displays a rather stark and severe wall with an opening. Now that opening, I understand, is going to be obscured and fixed closed, but I would like reassurance on that. And secondly, the question is that when you look at the consultations that have taken place, a number of residents have drawn attention to the fact that there's been no planning officer down on site. Could that be confirmed or denied? Just exactly what our planning department has done on site. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Maybe there's a mixture of questions there. Some are for you, Richard, and some might be for you, Karen, but you take them in the order you choose. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, if I may. That's very kind. Firstly, if I can deal with the issue of the timeline and what actually happened. Actually, no, I can't give you a categorical answer to that. And I also slightly don't want to, if that's all right. I don't think we should be attributing a motive to an individual without proper tested evidence in front of us as to how that happened. The committee report is purely trying to say that a submission was made. It was then pointed out that it was inaccurate. Another submission was made to remedy that. I don't think we're trying to attribute a cause to that, even though maybe the wording does lend itself to that. And I'd also suggest that from the perspective of considering the application before you, that's not actually relevant, I'm afraid. I know the committee will share officers' concerns around enforcement and people following the correct process and respecting the planning system as it exists, but effectively the application before us is for what it is, and it needs to be assessed exactly the same if it were retrospective or if it were not. There are some certain circumstances around where people have maliciously done something, but that doesn't occur, that doesn't impact on us here. So effectively, it is slightly a moot point from the perspective of determining this application as to exactly what's happened. There's now an application before you where we are confident, and it doesn't seem to be a matter of disputes between the parties as to its accuracy. Moving on to the permeable paving, yes, I think that is a good point. I don't think we need to change the condition. We can add an informative that is required. So if it goes in that direction, that's something which I imagine could be included. The condition around noise is a standard condition which is used by our environmental health team, because it is really the impact on neighbours who which needs to be considered. The application site has a benefit from the air source heat pump, and so it is therefore their decision as to whether or not to withstand the potential impact on them. And it's really the people who don't have an option around that, if I can put it that way, who needs to be protected. That's why that is the way it is. I mean, it is generally the case anyway that these units are very similar to air conditioning units, so they can be audible, they can have an impact, but it isn't very often that they are so significant as to cause significant amounts of disturbance. I'd like to reassure members that the photographs taken are photographs taken by officers on site visits. They've been selected to put into this presentation. We might have cropped them a bit to get them onto the slide, but we haven't distorted them or anything like that. They were taken at the point that the officer visited the site. So yes, a site visit has occurred. A site visit has also occurred by the enforcement team as well in their investigation, which led to the new application being submitted. And so it is accurate as to the relationship between properties. And then the final point is about the obscure glazing on the side windows. And yes, it's set out in the report that the first floor windows would be obscure glazed, and there would be a 1.8 metre fence proposed along that boundary. And so a combination of those and the separation distances lead us to be satisfied, convinced that the impact on the neighbours would be acceptable.
Thank you, Richard. I don't know if you want to add anything, Karen, at all. I think Richard did in fact cover the points, but please do if you want to. Looking around the room. Yeah, Ian, okay. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just like clarification, confirmation from the officers on a couple of points. The first is that I understand from what is being presented that the building has in fact been constructed in exactly the original place, and the boundary line has been found to be an error and has moved, but the building itself is in the position that it was originally planned to be. Therefore, it seems to me that all the various considerations such as views, overlooking, light would have been considered in the original planning application by the officers, and that none of those will have changed. I think we're all aware of the situation where it requires, fairly onerous conditions on, how much light is lost, and that there is no general protection on views unless they are special views, and therefore it's not generally a material consideration. A point that's been raised in one of the objections was that it would be difficult to get access down the narrower boundary, but it appeared to me that there was access down the other side where the retaining wall is, down the westerly side, and it would be helpful if you could confirm this. I think overall, my question would be, if this was brought to the officers as a new planning application, completely from scratch with the new boundaries known and in place, would they see any recommendation? Would they see any reason to recommend it, or would there be any material considerations that would concern them?
Thanks, Ian. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the building's in exactly the same place. As was pointed out, there's been a patio omitted and replaced effectively to the front. Apart from that, it is as approved, and so it is the site boundary, which is different. So yes, those relationships with adjoining properties have been considered and are unchanged. I suppose what is changed is the relationship with that side boundary. A relationship with the boundary in and of itself isn't really a consideration in planning terms, but the relationship with that hedge is. Comments have been made, obviously, in the presentations from the public speakers to the committee about some of their concerns around those. The majority of those are matters for building regulations or third-party issues and aren't planning considerations. The loss or provision of greenery and biodiversity is, and that's why there's a condition to secure some replacement planting. Obviously privacy is, and so there's also the conditions around the boundary fence. That's absolutely the case around views. I think the point which was made again in the public speaking around what can be seen inside properties due to level changes is a good point, which goes to privacy as well. There's more of a loss of privacy if you can see more of what's going on in a room, if I can put it that way. But because of the separation distances between those properties, well in excess of 30 meters, we are comfortable with that relationship, and so hopefully members will be comfortable in that relationship as well. And again, it hasn't changed. Access to the sides, to the western side, may be possible. I might check the drawings and come back if I may, Chair. It wouldn't easily be possible, but in an emergency, it could, I imagine, be taken from there. There is a level change at the rear along that boundary, which would need to be taken into consideration. But the Fire and Rescue Service have commented on the application and are satisfied. And finally, Chair, absolutely, if this were an application which weren't retrospective, it would be the same considerations and the same recommendations. Some of the conditions would be worded slightly differently around the trigger points as to when things happen.
Thank you, Richard. Tim.
Thank you for letting me come back. I'm particularly concerned about this wall which faces the back gardens of houses in Nelson Road. You say that window, I think up to 1.6 meters was going to be obscured. Are there any windows above that need to be shielded?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to find the relevant condition, if you'll bear with me. So it's condition 7. The proposed first floor openings in the flank walls, the side walls, shall be fitted with obscure glass and shall be fixed shut below 1.7 meters from the internal floor height. So effectively, a normal person, if I can put it that way, a relatively generously tall person, maybe their eye heights would be at 1.7 meters from the internal floor level. And so obscure glazing it up to that point means that it's unlikely that you could see into a garden in a way which significantly removes someone's privacy, but does still allow some outlook as well as light in through the window. So that's at first floor, and so that's up to 1.7 meters. At ground floor, there we would condition that there would be a fence at 1.8 meters, and being at a lower level, the impact in terms of loss of privacy is less significant as well. Does that address the issue?
Well, it doesn't quite address the issue for me, and I may not have fully understood the design of this house. But are there windows above the 1.7 which will have a visibility onto the back gardens of Nelson Road? And if they do, it's my contention that the privacy of those houses in Nelson Road is being affected.
So the height, in a moment, I'll go and point at the screen, but as the microphone's here. So the height of 1.7 meters is from the internal floor level. So whichever floor it's on, if it's on the ground floor or if it's on the first floor, which are the only two floors available, it doesn't matter. It's measured from the internal level. So on the side elevation, we're primarily talking about the east elevation here. As you can see, that would be obscure glazed at from the internal floor level, which is about where the cursor is, up to a height of 1.7 meters. So that window is more than 1.7 meters off the ground, but it would be obscure glazed so that you could not look into the neighbour's garden in a detrimental way. So.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Sorry, could I just check on that?
Yes, Ian.
Below that, are those additional windows, are they unobscured?
Correct. So the condition relates to the first floor windows. The windows at ground floor level would have less of an impact because they're at a lower level, and we would be conditioning that there's a boundary treatment at 1.8 meters height. There's been concerns raised about how that height would impact because of the level changes. It would need to be from 1.8 meters height where the building hits the ground effectively, so it would provide some screening. There would still be some outlook above it, but you'd be looking level or out as opposed to down into the gardens.
So those windows would just be looking straight out into a hedge or a fence. There seems very little point in having them.
Yeah, I think it's probably in response to the design of the house. If you look at the ground floor plan, that's all one large open living area, open plan living area. And so they have good southerly aspect windows as well. So those windows are these ones.
Okay.
So that, what you'd be looking at would be that. I mean, it is us who is imposing that condition. So maybe when it was designed, that wasn't thought of, but there would still be adequate light and outlook in the southerly direction.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody. If there are no more questions, I'm just going to, if I might just raise a point, which actually you already covered. But it was a point that obviously our speaker again thought very strongly about, which is that, to put it neutrally, if we were to give permission here, are we letting someone get away with something? And of course, I've heard what you've already said, Richard. But perhaps you could just go around that again, because I think this is, to be fair, this is the sort of point that people would have in their minds, and we just need to be very clear as to what the answer is, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, yeah, I don't want to ascribe a motive to anyone because I honestly don't know. It could have been malicious, it could have been a genuine error, it could have been anywhere in between those things. The point is, an error was made. There's now an application in front of us to remedy that, to rectify that. We would consider this application as if the house weren't there in that respect. You know, you consider it as you would a proposal for a brand new, unimplemented, uncarried out development. And so it's exactly the same consideration in that respect. I think it's probably worth noting as well that hopefully some of the issues at least raised by in the representations we'd like to think are being addressed through the conditions which are being imposed. We are comfortable with the material considerations. There are opportunities for replacement planting or soft landscaping. You could point around permeable paving. We're satisfied that the conditions would overcome concerns relating to loss of outlook and privacy as well.
Thank you, Richard. So if I might just offer a chairman's conclusion on that. So what we've got here obviously is something where permission was given previously for something which is very substantially what has been constructed. But there is a difference between what is being or has been constructed and that original permission. So a further application has been made for permission in relation to what either has been or is being constructed. And officers have considered that application simply on planning grounds. And the view you've arrived at is based on planning grounds. And if on planning grounds you had concluded that it would not be permissible, you would have advised us to reject this application. And insofar as you've reached the conclusion that on planning grounds, the current application works and meets planning considerations, you recommend approval, and that is why you have recommended approval.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, so allowing for that, then I think we've come to the time when we take a vote. I'm going to call for, I think I do need a proposer, don't I? Yes, I call for a proposer in the room. Councillor Ruffles, seconder. David, yes, okay. So I've Councillor Ruffles proposing, Councillor Andrews seconding, and just to take stock, what we're voting on is application 321-1248 FUL, which relates to the erection of a 3-bedroom dwelling to include 2 additional parking spaces and a refuse store, part retrospective at 19A Marlborough Close, Bishop Stortford, Hertfordshire. All those in favour, please show a hand. Yes, yeah, my Vice Chair is quite rightly reminding me that we did touch on an extra condition, didn't we, Richard? Or was it an informative or a condition? So we just factor that into the vote that we're taking. Thank you very much indeed, Tony. So can you just remind the members what that was, please?
Yeah, that the operative effects of that was to secure the parking areas or the hard standings at the front to be permeable paving where appropriate, and that can be secured through condition 6, the landscaping condition.
Yes, well done. Thank you very much, Tony, for that. So just with that in mind, can I just ask you to show hands again? So all those in favour, please show a hand. Yeah, I think that's everyone, but just for good order's sake, anyone against? No. Anyone abstaining? No. So we're there. Good. Okay. Thank you all very much indeed. So again, just to recap, we have just granted permission in relation to application 321-1248 FUL, erection of a 3-bed dwelling to include 2 additional parking spaces and a refuse store, part retrospective at 19A Marlborough Close, Bishop Stortford, Hertfordshire. Thank you all very much indeed. And thank you to the public speakers. We're now moving on. If I can just find the see what I've done with the agenda, that would be helpful, wouldn't it? Really, we could find out this. No, the agenda has decided to walk off my desk. Where is it? Yeah, yeah. No, I've got to find. Yeah, I know. Yeah, sure. I've just got to find the agenda. Can somebody? Just put it. Yes, please. That would be handy. Anyone's agenda will be good. Yeah, thank you. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Okay, item 6 is items for noting or just noting. We've got my excellent Vice Chairman just scrolling through the agenda here. I'm being deluged with agendas now. That's it. Item 6 is items for noting and reporting. We don't vote on this. We're just noting the reports. And then item 7 is any urgent business. There is none. So that therefore means that at 7:43 we close the meeting. Thank you very much.